Today is all about reading groups, and although I'm going to be talking about, or I'm drawing on a particular project and a particular scheme, I'm going to be raising lots of general principles so that if you are thinking about or you are already running a group in school, it will feed into that work as well. Just to give you a bit of context, I'm drawing today on a 2-year research project that I've been involved with or managing for the London School Excellence Fund called Developing Excellence in Reading 7 to 13. It ran for 2 years. It was partly funded by the DFE and partly funded by the Mayor's office. And it was for working with groups from year 5 to 8. We've just pulled together the evaluation, had some great results. They've been validated as statistically significant. And from that research, there's some principles that informed the development of this programme. The project itself was much wider, so I'm only focusing on a small aspect of it. And it was this. So we were charged to look at the highest attaining readers and see if we could help them reach their full potential. Very quickly, when we did our baseline work, we found that our high attaining readers were reading a lot, they were reading regularly, but their reading choices actually were very limited. So they were by and large reading very similar things to their peers. So we had lots of Hunger Games, we had lots of Maze Runner, we had lots of Twilight. This is year 6, so that's where we took our evidence from. Or they were reading the classics, and we had lots of children who were carrying around Dickens and Austen, which they were reading the full versions of those stories. But when we talked to them, when we probed a little bit more, we found that the reading of those classics was quite superficial, and by and large they were reading it because somebody had told them, you know, you're a really good reader, you should be reading this. It was a recommendation. And we felt that actually they hadn't, by and large, been equipped with the knowledge and the skills to develop more adventurous and risk-taking choices. So that was the first thing. The second thing we found was that the focus on year 5 through to 8 probably wasn't the most helpful, because in order to help them by the time they get there to make those risky, adventurous reading choices, you really need to be developing that at a much younger age. And so the reading group that I'm talking about as the main focus is a year 4 project for high attaining readers. And we chose year 4 because by and large children have then developed their reading fluency and they're starting to form their reading identities. But if you only have a very limited repertoire or palette, then your reading identity is restricted by what you have exposure to. So we felt that year 4 was a really key time for developing identity in reading. And then the third thing was that we found that these readers read very quickly, but actually they read very fast and they missed lots of detail and they missed lots of significant detail. So part of our reading group is about slowing down the pace and being much more reflective with reading, not racing on, not racing ahead. Reading stamina, how old-fashioned is that word? And yet we did want to look at reading stamina. Today's conference, it's called Passing on the Passion. It's all about reading for pleasure. I'm going to be the 13th fairy at the christening. And while everybody's singing the delights of reading for pleasure, I'm going to say pleasure's not the most important word. Yes, it kind of hooks you in and it engages you, but sometimes reading is hard work. And for these readers that I'm talking about, it's very important that they learn to make that bridge across the the transition, because they see that it's going to be worth it at the other end. They can see the worth in reading. I'm going to make a case for reading for wisdom rather than reading for pleasure. I think wisdom's quite an important thing. You might want to set up groups for any number of reasons. Highest attaining readers, you know, I think sometimes for me it's really good to, as the reader here said, you know, to kind of celebrate what they do and help them to have impact on the rest of the school, because they do, they become advocates, they become champions. And aspirational reading is genuinely infectious. So we've got some of our books that we've chosen and they become the most read books in the school. So there's that side. But is it for the less engaged? Is it for mums and daughters or dads and lads? Is it a particular year group? Is it going to be self-selected? All those sorts of things that you will want to be asking yourselves. Some other key questions then, obviously once you know what you're trying to achieve through your group and who it's for, the planning is really important, and getting that straight in your head before you start, you know. So when are you going to read? Is it going to be a regular weekly session? And if you feel that you can't attain that, much better to plan a different kind of group than one that peters out halfway through. So with Reading Gladiators, we have, I would say, about 70% of our groups are run by teachers or head teachers, and 30% are run by other adults, because actually, as long as they are passionate about reading and they know how to engender a discussion and a conversation, that's much more important than, again, somebody who is so pressurised that they feel they haven't got the time to run it. Then you may want to think about where it happens, because I actually think that the reading group formula can actually feed into general teaching. And again, we've got about 75% of our groups they're running them within the reading lesson, and about 25% are running them as extracurricular lunchtime or school clubs. And those that run them this year as lunchtime clubs are starting to pull them into their lessons and think, actually, we could organise our lesson in this way. So, book choices. This is what I wanted to talk about. I'm talking now specifically about the year 4 projects, the Reading Gladiators. And I don't know if it has been obvious to you in Great Bardfield, but we did choose these books to take the children on a reading journey over 8 months. So we're thinking that coming from year 3 into year 4, what does that reader look like? By the time they finish, they're almost ready for year 5. Where would we like them to be? And how are we going to take them step by step so they don't almost realise that they're being taken on that journey? So then we come on to planning the reading. And again, really important that this is given some thought beforehand, making sure there's time to read the books, but also get to the end of those books and not drop them halfway. It's so disappointing if they don't get a chance to round off and celebrate properly. And how much reading should be done between sessions? So with our group, the books do go home. We send letters to the parents. We encourage the parents to be part of it and perhaps read the books alongside the children, but definitely not to test them and, you know, what have you read, how much have you read, what do you make of it so far? More a sharing, read the book and talk about how you think about the book as an adult. What do you think of it? Of course, not all parents participate, but some do. I thought I'd share with you, because I'm sure you'd like to go away with some practical thoughts and strategies too. When you're actually in your reading group, how do you manage the talk? So one of the things that we try to do is to avoid too much interrogative questioning, too much teacher questioning. Because no matter how thoughtful you have been, if you are the one asking the questions, it's always going to feel like an interrogation. It's always going to feel like you're the one that knows the answers. So we have some techniques and strategies that we use as discussion openers, and I thought I'd share some of them with you today. One of them is the silent discussion. So has anybody ever done silent discussion before? It's very powerful tool. Have you ever done this, Rachel? Okay. So after they've read the book, they don't talk to each other, and we just get them to write down their thoughts on a sheet of paper like this. If they haven't done it before, we might give them some prompts to help them. So we might say, You can write about your favourite bit, you can write about whether it reminds you of anything, you know, those prompts that you would normally give. Does it connect with anything that you already know? Do you have any questions about the book? So we might give them some prompts to begin with, but they soon get used to doing it. And what you have is that they start to have a dialogue with each other, because they go around and they have a look at what each other's written. They respond to each other. One says, I didn't like this bit. Someone says, I totally disagree. And then this becomes the starting point for your discussion as a group. So we've got a few of those silent discussions here. This one we got them to do at the end of the programme as well. So they went back and revisited all 8 books and wrote about them, because revisiting is important as well, I think. Another way of managing the silent discussion is almost like consequences. So we would get Tamara to write down her thoughts about Silver Donkey, and then she would pass them on to Lily, who would read Tamara's thoughts, and she would respond then to Tamara's thoughts and then pass it on. So we get a chain of discussion going around the table, and then we open it up for verbal discussion. So these are silent ways in, where you then just tap into the individual mind rather than everybody not knowing quite how to start. We use questcussions. Has anybody come across that? Questcussions? It's a discussion which is made up entirely of questions. So I use this mainly where I have a group that's reticent to ask their own questions, because all they're allowed to do is ask questions. So I did one of these recently with a passage from the opening, actually, from The Secret Garden. And one of the children partway through says, I think it's set in India. And at that point, that's a statement, not a question. So if a statement is given, the whole group shout out, statement! And that person has to then rephrase it a question. So I wonder where this book is set. And it's very rapid, it's quick fire. I wouldn't overuse it, but it's great for children that just won't ask questions about a text.